Kenya Demographic and Health Survey 2022. Quite interesting numbers. First of all, the amount of children, the number of children that we are having. Of course, we're comparing with the 70s, that has gone down, but also literacy has a huge bit of that. And we are almost 50 plus million Kenyans. Population seems to be at the center of everything when you talk even about economics. Maybe bring us out, in context of what this means.
Many thanks, Noah. Indeed, the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey is a very critical report, published once every 4 years. I think this is a report that every business leader and policymaker needs to study because it gives a live commentary really on the state of our society. And as you've said, families are having fewer children. Back in the 70s, you'd find the typical family would have about 7 children. That has dramatically dropped to 3 children, and it can be attributed to a number of things, possibly the cost of living, people delaying getting into unions, and a number of things have played, and just lifestyle choices. But I think from an economic perspective, we look at things such as demand, the aggregate demand, and aggregate demand really speaks to consumption in a country. And definitely the bigger the population, the bigger the demand, the more positive it can be for an economy. So we do hope that the policies that come forward really speak to a country that wants to pursue what you call life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Really people being able to fulfill their maximum potential. And I hope that will be the foundation on how we align both our fiscal and our monetary policies.
When you have a population of close to 40% being under the age of 15, I know there are projections, but we are relatively a very young continent and a very young country. Does that hold economic implications?
It does. In fact, it's considered as the foundation of what we call the demographic dividends. These are young people who will go to high school, will go to university, and they will secure jobs, and they will be part of the consumption framework of the country. In fact, one of the reasons big investors that are coming from the US, from Europe to Kenya, is because they know our median age is quite young. Our median age in this country is only 19 years. Compare that to 36 years in the US, or about 46 years in Germany and Japan. So it's a young labor force, young consumption, so the future is here. So that means even businesses here have to align their goods and services to speak to a young population that is emerging. So as long as Kenya can continue to have good health policies, good education policies, this will be one of the key drivers of Kenya's economy over the next 2 decades.
One of the biggest drivers in the Kenya Kwanza government, of course, we have the better approach, the bottom-up economic transformation, strategy that they are implementing in this government, and digital superhighway is top of that. Now, we boast as a country when we talk about digitization and mobile penetration, relatively high. Looking at these numbers and the statistics here, 44% of women and 56% of men used the internet in the last 12 days. Talking about employment, 60% of women and 81% of men were employed in the last 12 months, and also 1% of women and 12% of men currently. That was about tobacco usage, since it's a health report. But talk to me about this number about internet usage and marry in the policy framework that we've seen even in the Finance Act. Are we seeing a boost where we are not just slightly above average in terms of utilization of internet, but not only utilization, but something that has utility in our lives?
Well, absolutely. I think the internet is one of the biggest factors of production in the digital economy. And you're absolutely right that Kenya has been a leader in the continent in how it utilizes that particular channel. I think the key thing moving forward is how can we advance internet to not just for entertainment purposes, but in terms of things such as edtech. Edtech is a growing sector. How can that be used to reach the last mile in terms of education? A lot of people are getting skills in terms of through the internet. So it's a powerful force that, if used well, can definitely create much good. Now, when you talk about marrying it with what we've seen in the Finance Act, obviously you remember there was that tiff with the digital content creators when that withholding tax had been raised to 15%. But the government had those worries and they were able to reduce it back down to 5%. So it's a good thing. I think if you look at the next jobs in the next few years, are jobs that never existed maybe 5 years ago. Think of social media analysts, think of content creators. So it's a new avenue, particularly in economies where unemployment is very high. The digital economy can create new opportunities and really be able to bring down those unemployment numbers.
All right. And even from the title of this particular report, health survey, we say a healthy country is a wealthy country, Ken. And looking at these numbers, 68% of the population has at least basic drinking water service. 65% of the population has sufficient quantities of drinking water in the last month. 41% of the population has at least basic sanitation services. And we juxtapose this with this being a human right, access to clean water. When you see a 60% figure, is that a concern? And even comparing that with the budgetary allocation, with the different agreements that we've had in regards to allocating our resources as a country, are we seeing a mismatch, or is the government taking these numbers seriously?
No, there is definitely a mismatch, Noah. What you've said is access to basic clean water is something that a country that's 50 years old, 60 years old into independence should have achieved. One of our biggest development partners is Japan. Japan has the highest longevity in the world. I think many people there live to see 100 years. And I've always wondered, why don't we draw some of those lessons? In fact, some of the master plans, the water master plan we have in Nairobi, was actually created by the Japanese in the 70s. So the policy makers, the policy ideas are there, but there always seems to be that lethargy, that dragging our feet on key indicators like that. And I think this is something maybe that the government in its scorecard can actually use to show the daily work that's going to be able to put this in place in terms of access to electricity, access to clean water. And it's great to see some of the water ponds that are coming up, the dams that are coming up in some of the areas. But indeed, one would ask, did it have to take 60 years before we prioritize those?
Definitely. 34% of households are headed by women. Also, households have an average of 3.7 members. And I know we've touched about people having fewer children. Which is critical as technology enhances, issues to do with birth control kicks in. We see also, as you stated earlier, and I noted you mentioned that people are delaying to get into unions. Yeah, and it was like, hey, go to, yeah, but on a light note, Ken. But looking at this, the issue of households, right there seems to be the core. Those are the forming pieces of a country. Compare for me, households having an average of 3.7 members and the current state of the economy. What are they marrying? Are they matching, or might there be a struggle?
Well, I think that statistic, there is both a positive side and a negative side. I think the positive side, it speaks to more women empowerment in Kenya. We have more women empowerment in terms of access to opportunities. Noah, if you go back to independence, the ratio of boys to girls in schools was about 118 boys to one girl. Today, that number is about 10 boys to 14 girls. So definitely, I think the numbers speak to equality sort of like gaining footage. I think the negative side to that is, as you say, on the economic front, where in another report, separate report, not this one, we talked about there being higher likelihood of poverty in female-led households. I thought that was quite a curious report, and I didn't quite understand the reasons behind that. So it also speaks to a situation where opportunities might appear to be equal, but when you scratch the surface, they're still not as equal as you'd expect. So there is more work in terms of making sure there is equality around genders, but there's also true equality in terms of incomes, because yes, you can have equality on genders, but sometimes the income parities might not always be the same.
Yeah, and finishing up before we take a break, because when we come back, we'll be taking a look at the CBK and the Monetary Policy Committee numbers. But 22% of women and 15% of men do not access newspapers, television, and radio on a weekly basis. This is personal, since in this line of work. And 91% of women and 94% of men are literate. But what I want us to take a look at this issue of access to information. I know they've mentioned these are traditional or legacy media. I know we have digital newspapers, TV and radio. Might this number maybe be different if there is the aspect of digital uptake of information and access to news, unlike we've had, historically?
I'm not sure, no, and that's quite a contradicting statistic that we have there, where the literacy levels have gone up. Most people, I think it's about 90%, can be able to speak basic English Kiswahili, but they don't practice that literacy to look at serious content, maybe the newspapers, radio, things that might have economic benefits to them. So it speaks to higher literacy levels, the ability, but in terms of the curiosity to find important content. A lot of young people avoid newspapers. They say the content there is not useful. But if you're a business person, tenders are published in the newspapers, job adverts are published in the newspapers. A lot of serious material is published in the newspapers. So I think the key thing, possibly this could go back to education, is it's not just about the facility of learning or numeracy, but also how do you apply that to be able to take in more serious content around economy, around sociology, around history, around philosophy. I think that's a big question there.
All right, definitely. Remember, it's Business Today, BizChat, and we're breaking down the biggest stories that have happened this week. We're taking a break right now. When we come back, the Monetary Policy Committee has raised the rates, the central bank rates. What is the implication of this to you as an individual and overall as a country? We'll return with more.